Hey everybody, this is Jordan from Wednesday Night Warhammer. Today we're going to be talking about what I think is our best detachment. I'm going to rank all 6 of our detachments from 6 all the way to 1. I'm really interested to see if you agree with me. If you disagree with me, please let me know. I'd love to hear it in the comments. Here we go. These are our 6 detachments we currently have as Tyranids, and in no specific order, of course. We have Assimilation Swarm, the Regrow, Regen, Necron style detachment, Crusher Stampede, all monsters, all the time, Invasion Fleet, kind of an all around support everything detachment, Synaptic Nexus, just brain bugs from all the eye can see, Unending Swarm, just a bunch of little gribbly guys, and then the Vanguard Onslaught. Those are our 6. Let's see what I have at number 6. These are our 6 detachments we currently have as Tyranids. And Assimilation Swarm, number 6. I'm sad to do this, number 6 for Assimilation Swarm. I think this detachment is probably the fluffiest. I think it is probably the most fun. But it is at number 6 for a couple of different reasons, and let's get into it right now. So the strengths that Assimilation Swarm has is its first off is its durability. The main gimmick around it is you can regen your big monsters, or you can regrow your infantry units, depending on if they are nearby a harvester unit. So that's kind of the gimmick. It's got pretty good, okay durability because of that. You can do things like Pyrovores can regrow an entire Pyrovore. Pyrovores are not as easy as they look like to kill, so that is kind of pretty good durability in that. They actually have some pretty goofy strong combos. There's a stratagem where once one of your Ripper Swarms or something dies, then your entire army can get +1 to wound against whatever killed it. That could do very well, especially because Tyranids struggle into higher toughness units. In addition, Gene Stealers can get up to Strength 6 with an enhancement, as long as the Broodlord has that enhancement and kills a unit, which is Strength 6 Gene Stealers. Whew, that is very good. In addition to Gene Stealers coming back every once in a while, if you're able to combo off the Harvester Regrow, just Strength 6 Gene Stealers hitting something seems really, really good. And then one thing that I think is overlooked a little bit, and definitely I think a strength in Assimilation Swarm, is the sticky objective strat. There's a stratagem where if a harvester unit is on an objective, I think it's the end of your command phase, you can pay CP, and then that objective is sticky. Sticky objectives are very strong, and that's the only access that Tyranids have in it in the entire book. So I think it is actually worth considering and understanding that sticky objectives, if they're used properly, can be very beneficial. However, the weaknesses that Assimilation Swarm has, and I think the largest one is that first bullet point right there, is just we just have a limited number of harvester units. The problem is the harvester units that we have: Pyrovores, Ripper Swarms, Harspexes, the Psychophage. I think that's it. But that's it. These units are pretty good. They're okay, but I feel like we're jumping through a bunch of hoops to buff and support these units that are just not really the best part of our codex. So it is kind of awkward. There are some strong buffs and strong combos like I was talking about before, but it's to make some of our subpar units kind of rise to the middle, and I think we just have better things in our codex that could just use support in other ways. Another thing is the timed durability. There is a strat that you can use for a harvester unit that is on an objective to get up to a 4-up Feel No Pain, which is really, 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 really strong. However, besides something like that, it is very selective with that durability. You're going to regrow in the command phase, of course, but I feel like it is still something your opponent can play around, and that definitely goes to my third bullet point. The buffs are gone if your harvester units are dead. So if I'm an opponent and I'm looking at your Assimilation Swarm list, I'm probably going to single out the Harspexes. I'm going to single out the Psychophages and the Pyrovores, and maybe isolate an area where your detachment rule really kind of does nothing because you're out of Assimilation Swarm units. Number 5, we got the Crusher Stampede. This is a detachment that's near and dear to my heart. I loved this Army of Renown in ninth edition. It has come back, not nearly as strong, but it did get buffs in Pariah Nexus. But let's talk about why I think it deserves the number 5 slot instead of higher up. Strengths, it is a stat check army. If you run a field of monsters, there's going to be some armies you go up against that they're just simply not going to be able to handle that. So that is definitely a buff. If you throw 2 Maleceptors and a Tyrannofex into the center of the battlefield, there's some armies that just lose on the spot towards that. So that is definitely a plus. We do have efficient units in this. I think Tyranids definitely are one of those armies that really does well with our monstrous units. They have good guns, they have good durability, and especially with the buff from Pariah Nexus or the data slate, it does help out with that OC for the starting strength. So it is good. All of those units, I think, Tyrannofexes, Maleceptors, Exocrines, even Haruspecs, get even more efficient when you stack the Crusher Stampede buffs on, like +1 to hit, +1 to wound. And then, like, another one of those changes with the data slate is that they have a stronger mobility with the change to the untrammeled ferocity stratagem. Means that we can just basically go through walls and maybe get battle shocked, but also my Norn emissary can jump through a wall and charge whatever is behind it, which I think is definitely a needed change for this. However, the weakness is, it's kind of funny, like I was talking about, it's a stack check army where if somebody cannot handle monsters, and they could almost lose on the spot. It goes kind of the same way. If you are going against an army that is very, very well versed and able to kill these monsters, like if you melt a spam sisters, it can be really bad because your monsters can die very quickly. And then you end up running out of units and action economy for your units to do, which could definitely leave you to lose the game. And that kind of flows into my next point, is the low unit count. Because you're spending all of these points, and even though they are efficient units, you have less room for these action units like lictors, termagants, gargoyles, hormagaunts, or what have you. And it kind of, sometimes you're going to have a Tyrannofex establishing locus, or you're going to have a Haruspex cleansing, and that's not necessarily what you want to be doing as a monster mash detachment. Monsters can be played around, even though the untrammeled ferocity stratagem allows one monster to go through walls. They can still be move blocked. That's one monster. That's not 4 or 5 monsters that can do that. So if you're playing against somebody that is, well versed in handling and moving around monsters, it can be really tough to play around. And I think I've talked about it already, but actions can be difficult. In Pariah Nexus, actions score you points, and that's just kind of the way of the game. So if you're having your Haruspex, your Exocrine, or your Tyrannofex doing an action like containment or something, it is not scoring you points in the way of killing your opponent's units, which is not always the desired effect. Synaptic Nexus, I think, as number 4, the Synaptic Nexus is actually kind of strong right now. Synaptic Nexus got a reasonable buff with a Neurotyrant being able to attach to the Zoanthropes. That does allow for one of its strongest units to kind of even push further in terms of damage. But because of some things within it, I definitely think it deserves the number 4 slot in our overall ranking of detachments. So let's talk about its strengths. I think Synaptic Nexus is very flexible for what it does. Not in terms of damage dealing. I think it does very high damage, but it's not necessarily flexible in the units that it goes into, but it's flexible in the way that you can fall back and shoot with that. And with a detachment that wants to use Maleceptors and Zoanthropes as kind of like the backbone of their army, fall back, shoot, and charge is definitely a fantastic stratagem for the detachment to have access to. It buffs strong units. So this is a detachment that is going to be asking you and wanting you to be playing units that are already strong within the codex, such as Maleceptors, such as Zoanthropes. Believe it or not, I think the Exocrine does get some support because of the strat with reroll 1s off of the other Synaptic units, and that allows for units like the Exocrine to hit even harder than it already does. That's pretty nice. In addition, there's a really strong stratagem that is very similar to Armor of Contempt. -1 AP to any incoming shots. That means if you have a Maleceptor in cover, you can Armor of Contempt it, and then it essentially gets +2 to its save. So that Maleceptor saving on 3s instead of 4s is actually a incredible defensive buff. If you're wanting to run a Norn Emissary build, then keeping that Norn Emissary at a 2-up save for as much as you can is also incredibly strong. One more really strong point that I actually really like in the Synaptic Nexus list is the Deep Strike Denial enhancement that is available for it. I think a 12-inch Deep Strike Denial is something that Tyranids kind of want. You have your Biovore in the back, but it's not always going to protect you from Inceptors. I have had my Biovore killed by Inceptors far too many times to count, and some character back there with a 12-inch Deep Strike Denial would definitely be extremely helpful for our list. Not too many weakness in my opinion, the Synaptic Nexus, but two of them are, the first one is the units have to be in Synapse. I know Tyranids are pretty good being able to keep things in Synapse, and everything kind of wants to be in Synapse all the time. But if you're running some of these utility pieces, they might struggle to get the benefits from Synapse unless you are very careful of your placement of those units. And the last one, unfortunately, it's overshadowed by other detachments. I think most certainly the Invasion Fleet. I think Invasion Fleet just does really well into a lot of different styles of lists, and the damage buffs that Synaptic Nexus gives, I don't think quite match up to some of the flexibility and damage buffs that Invasion Fleet inherently has. We have the Unending Swarm at 3rd. I think this detachment is still quite strong, even though they received a large nerf with the data slate as well as Pariah Nexus, but we will get into that in a moment. First off, its strengths. It's incredible movement tricks. The Blood Surge type of ability that you get for all of these Gribbly guys is very good, and can get your opponent caught off guard unless they are really familiar with how it works and where and how they should be activating, because whoops, before you know it, you have 20 Hormagaunts that are in combat with your scouts or whatever that just wanted to chip off a couple of wounds, which could be a disaster for your opponent. They have huge mission play with battle line units. Pariah Nexus, it's not nearly as big of a buff to battle line keyword units as I think some people thought it would be, but definitely Unending Swarm takes advantage to any battle line unit buffs that GW is giving with any of the missions. The fall back and do an action, advance and do an action, etc. I definitely think that this detachment just kind of slots in and is just happy to have that kind of stuff. It's surprisingly durable. Like 20-man blobs of Hormagaunts, Gargoyles, or Termagants with different amounts of buffs. If you put a Psychophage or whatever in it, if you can regrow with a Turvagon, if you do the strat to deny blast, all of those things kind of add up. Oh, and Venom Thropes. All those things kind of add up to make your opponent have to overcommit to kill one of your squads, or oftentimes they don't commit quite enough, and then you're able to regrow or blood surge into a unit that your opponent really did not want to be tied up in combat. And I think the last bullet point to the strength is really what this detachment does well. It's movement and primary denial. You're going to flood the board with as many Gaunts as possible. Probably do your best to keep your opponent on like a 0 primary as many turns as possible, which is fairly easy to do with this list. And it's going to be a low scoring game, probably, at least for your opponent, and it's going to be hard for them to gain a foothold if you are able to take the board like that. So definitely a strong factor of Unending Storm. The weaknesses, however, just like we were talking about with Crusher Stampede, it is a skew list. If your opponent is able to kill, 100 some odd T3 models, then they're going to do that, and they're going to rip through all of your models, and maybe they are okay with being in combat because they're just going to kill all of your stuff regardless. So that is definitely a thing to be conscious of, not committing maybe too many squads at once into your opponent's army. Next, the Pariah Nexus changes. There's two giant big changes. I guess one of them is the data slate, but one, the stratagem Cull the Horde definitely hurts this style because your opponent can just take Cull the Horde and another secondary, and then they just play their game as usual, trying to get as much primary, but then they're going to score points every single time they kill any of your units, which is kind of tough. Yeah, that is tough. Oh, and the data slate change was you can only regen one unit for the entire game. So if they're able to kill one of your units early on, you're forced to pop that 2 CP thing, and then whatever they kill for the rest of the game is dead, which is kind of tough. I think this detachment leans towards a higher skill ceiling because you have to be so careful with your movement, because you have to be so careful with your time management as well. It is something to acknowledge that if you are playing this detachment, this list, I think you really need to know what you're doing, because you kind of are balancing on a razor's edge of, yes, denying primary, but you don't want to give up too much of your army too early so that your opponent can score a lot of big points on turns 3, 4, and 5. So I definitely think it is a balance on that. And then last but not least, it does not do a whole lot of damage. You're going to score points, you're going to score primary and secondary, and you're going to deny a lot of points. However, if your opponent is playing an army that is okay with just pushing their army directly into your face, there's a good chance that the Unending Storm is not going to be able to kill that army. Number 2 is the Vanguard Onslaught. I really love this detachment as well. I made a video a long time ago about it. I think it's really cool. All the lictors and all the gene stealers. It's definitely a really cool aesthetic as well as a strong detachment. Some of those strengths are it's a very fast pressure army. You can put 30 gene stealers into your opponent's face turn 1. It's a pretty big hole for your opponent to dig out of. So definitely a very large strength in it. With all of that, it has huge primary and secondary denial. You can move block everywhere with all of your gene stealers or Von Ryans or whatever. And that leads your opponent to get worse primary as well as a worse secondary because they're not able to get out of gene stealer jail. In addition to that, because you want to be playing so many lictors and all of those squiggly guys, you're going to have a large amount of scoring units. The lictors score very well. They're a very efficient unit. 55 points for something to sit on an objective if you need to, and then get your cleanse, get your containment, whatever it may be. And last, certainly not least in this strength category, is the 6-inch Lone Up is a very, very strong stratagem that not a lot of armies have, or actually no other armies from what I'm aware of have access to. It allows your lictor to just sit on an objective, and your opponent has to commit a melee unit or get really, really close to it in order to do anything. And then at which point your Gene Stealers or your Tyranid Warriors can jump out and do a really strong counterattack on whatever killed your poor lictor guy. However, there are some weaknesses to this detachment, and it can bounce against really high toughness armies. If you're playing against knights, this could be a really hard time for you if you are not getting your battle shocks off at the appropriate time. Transports are also really hard to pop with this detachment, so that can definitely be a detriment to all of your fast moving units. It's very fragile. If you get stuck in with something, kill a unit, but then you're out in the open, you're not able to do that 18-inch Lone Op or even 6-inch Lone Op, then your opponent is probably just going to be able to pick up whatever unit you have out there, and then could end up being a worse trade for you unless you're able to be very decisive about that. That actually leads to my last bullet point here is I think this detachment has a very high skill ceiling. You have to know when to put your units where, and where to counterattack. Otherwise, you could be trading a giant Gene Stealer blob for something that is definitely less than all of that. So you have to be very careful of your movement as well as when you attack and with what. Number 1, in my opinion, is the Invasion Fleet. It is a little bit sad that, our index detachment is our best detachment, at least in my opinion for right now, but it is for a very good reason. Our strengths in the Invasion Fleet is extremely flexible. You're going to get your lethals against monsters or vehicles. You're going to get your sustained hits against your infantry-based armies that you're going against. And even if there's a mix for 1 CP, you can put 2 units and do the other thing. That's great. That's an incredible stratagem. And because of that, it's going to buff all of your units. Like unlike Vanguard Onslaught or Assimilation Swarm or Synaptic Nexus, pretty much every single one of your units is going to be able to do its thing and even do its thing better because of Invasion Fleet. The stratagems support everything, all types of units. You have your Endless Swarm stratagem to bring back your primary scoring and primary denial gargoyles or hormagaunts. And then you have your Adrenal Surge that is going to help your Gene Stealers kill an even harder target than is normally possible with crits on 5s. Because of that, it definitely allows for an all-comer style of list. That means that you are going to be able to build a list that is going to be strong against pretty much any kind of army that is out there. I feel like Invasion Fleet has play into Knights and heavy vehicle spam lists, and it also has a lot of play into Swarm lists. And that is because of the pivot that Invasion Fleet is able to have, either the sustain hits or the lethal hits, which makes it for a very strong detachment. That being said, I do want to talk about a couple of weaknesses that I kind of think it has. The first one is Invasion Fleet is definitely a jack of all trades. It's a master of none. Invasion Fleet is going to be able to go into those Knights with the lethals. It is going to be able to go into those, the Swarm list and everything, but that doesn't mean that it's the best thing out there to kill Knights. Lethals on 6s into vehicles is good, and it will up your damage profile, but it does. Other than that, it's just like a 16% boost in the damage profile. Other than that, it's not really like backbreaking for your Knights player to go up against. Lethals are lethals. They only normally happen on 6s unless you spend CP, but it's okay. It's all right. It is good, but it definitely doesn't just absolutely demolish any vehicle list out there. Also, Tyranids, especially in Invasion Fleet, they're just kind of incredibly fair. Gargoyles are annoying with their shoot and scoot, and Biovores are annoying with their Spore Mines, still scoring secondaries. But other than that, I definitely feel like if your opponent knows what they're doing and firmly understands what Tyranids are doing, then they can definitely devise a game plan to play around and play against a detachment, even as good as Invasion Fleet. Again, thank you all for watching. If you disagree with me or if you agree with me, please let me know in the comments. Like, comment, share, subscribe, do all those things, and definitely check out our live shows every Wednesday, 5:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have a strong rotation of armies, a strong rotation of friends just having a good time, rolling dice, and playing some good games. Hope to see you there.